Welcome into the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and it is that time of year. October is here. College basketball is right around the corner, and that means it is conference preview season. But before we get there, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you share and subscribe this 24/7 Sports channel and the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show. Now, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk the Big East Conference. Why are we starting with the Big East? Well, because they've won the last two national championships. Of course, that means the UConn Huskies have won the last two championships. So today we are going to dive into every team in the Big East. And joining me in that is 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports, Isaac Trotter. Isaac, what is up?
Doing well. I think for anybody who wonders where Eric Bossi is, the Kansas City Royals are playing today in the Major League Baseball playoffs. That's the only reason why he's not here. He has bigger things to attend to.
Yeah, I didn't even know baseball playoffs were happening. One sport. All right, so here's how we are going to organize this and all the previews. We're going to try and take all the fluff off right off the bat. You have organized these teams into tiers, and we are going to go through each tier in the order you have them and just talk about each team in the conference. So even if I'm not going to say any names, even if you're a fan of a team that's not very good, we're going to talk about your team. But we're going to talk more about the better teams. So let's get right into it. Just the backdrop of the Big East Conference, 2 straight national championships, did not fare well on Selection Sunday a year ago, only got 3 teams in, but all 3 of those teams got to the Sweet 16, so they had a little something to say about it a week later. Isaac, the first tier, which we are deeming, well, why don't you explain to us like how you organize this top tier of yours?
Yeah, this is just the group where if we wake up in the first weekend of April and this team's playing for the national championship, you probably wouldn't be that stunned, right? And that's where UConn comes into play. They're really the only team in the Big East in this group because we've seen it before. And I've said it all offseason. I don't know if this roster is at the caliber of last year's roster that won the national title. But the fact that we're having this conversation is because Dan Hurley and his staff is the best coach and the best staff in the country. And their ability to maximize this roster, I think, is the reason why we're having this conversation. You know, the best part about UConn that I've always said is their ability to ask players to do what they're good at and kind of cover up what they're not very good at is really, really tremendous. So you look at this group and yeah, it's a lot of unproven guys, but I'm betting on them to be able to maximize this team, especially defensively. Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed, you have an option there to be elite defensively at the rim using 2 different coverages, Terrace Reed and drop coverage. Samson Johnson is a big that you can really blitz teams with. And then their point of attack defense. If you're going to play for Dan Hurley, you better be able to guard at the perimeter, and UConn has that in waves. So they have point of attack defense, they have switchy wings, they have rim protection, they got girth inside. This group is going to be really, really good defensively to factor in to Dan Hurley's outstanding X's and O's offensively.
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest. I have more faith in this group offensively than I do defensively. I think Alex Caravan and Liam McNeely, those 2 guys, I think are really going to be able to do something, be focal points for them. I think it's asking a lot for Liam to step in and be as impactful as we expect he will be. I think the backcourt is a little bit of an X factor. Hassan Diarra has kind of been the defensive stalwart off the bench for the last 2 years. He's going to come in and take over the starting point guard job. And then the expectation is Aiden Mahaney, the St. Mary's transfer, will join him. I'm interested to see how that backcourt goes. I would not be at all surprised if we see players like Solo Ball and Jalen Stewart step into bigger roles as this season goes on. That is your projected starting lineup we're looking at right now, and I do not disagree with it, but I do wonder if we get to a point where Jalen Stewart and Solo Ball are perhaps more important to this group than some players in that starting 5. I think that also, listen, it's a new day when Donovan Klingon's not back there. You know, I mean, your defense, I mean, Samson Johnson's still going to be a really good rim protector, and their defense is still going to be top shelf under Dan Hurley, but there is not that safety valve back there that there used to be. Now, I have said on this show that I think Hurley and his staff were playing chess when everybody else was playing checkers the last couple of years. And to your point, that is why they are in a category by themselves. That is why they are a legitimate national championship contender. But the teams that have won national championships have produced, I think it's something like 5 pros in the last 2 years. How about this stat? Everybody who has started in that starting lineup the last 2 years is now a pro. Either Alex Karaban's the only one who back. Everybody else is in the NBA. So the question from a talent standpoint is it the same level guys? We're going to find out now, because at the beginning of last season, nobody was calling Cam Spencer a pro, but after a year at UConn, he turned out to be one. So we'll see what people are saying about these guys 6 months from now.
No one was calling Tristan Newton a pro either. So
that's for sure.
Clear development that we're talking about. That's the ultimate X factor, because on paper, we really probably shouldn't be putting them in a tier of its own in the Big East. There's a lot of really good rosters here, but the X factor is the player development that this staff is just really, really good at. And
again, they've earned it, like to win, not just 2 national championships, but to run away with it, like for 2 straight years. They have earned this spot until somebody proves otherwise. All right. Now, tier 2 teams you've got. I think you designated these as top 25 caliber rosters. You've got 4 teams in this section: Creighton, St. John's, Xavier, and Marquette. Now, is this your order? Creighton, St. John, is that the order that we are subscribing to at the moment?
That's kind of how I feel for now, but I really feel interchangeable about those top 3. I think Creighton, St. John's, and then when you throw in Xavier, I think those teams might end up having like a top 15 ceiling. I'm not sure if Marquette can quite get there, but that's kind of the general tier of those things. I feel really good about all 4 of those teams being in the NCAA tournament, safely in the NCAA tournament. I don't expect them to be on the bubble in March.
All right, well, let's start with Creighton. Tell me why you think they're a potential top 15 team.
When you get Ryan Kalkbrenner back, that's such a cheat code defensively. They've been elite defensively every single year with him there. We know what they're going to do offensively, having a lot of extra shooting. And then the guys out of the portal that they've been able to add, the Pop Isaacs addition out of Texas Tech, I think he is a little bit underrated, and Creighton can get the most out of him. He joins a backcourt with Stephen Ashworth, who can really, really shoot it. Jemiah Neal, a lot of people are like, why are you going after a guy like that? If there was a big, worry about Creighton last year, it was just that lack of like tip-top athleticism. Neal has that, and I think he's going to be weaponized defensively for this group as a guy who can go over every screen. I think he's going to guard the best opposing guard on opposing teams and go over screens, can really contest shots with Kalkbrenner in a deep drop coverage. So I just have such a great confidence in what Greg McDermott does offensively. And then with Kalkbrenner back defensively, you have such a high floor. And the big X factor for this group is Vedor Zujic, a guy from Germany. We're going to not really sure if he's going to be eligible right away. He says he's a freshman on the roster, but he isn't. He's 21. He's played professional basketball for 4 years over there. So they're working through some eligibility concerns, but he is an elite off-movement shooter. If he's eligible by Big East play, this is a massive game changer and a guy who I think will probably slot into this starting lineup.
If he's eligible, it's a massive game changer for Creighton. It takes their roster to new levels. And it's also a massive game changer for the way rosters are constructed and the way international recruiting will be handled moving forward. I will fully admit I am not well-versed on his eligibility status, but from what I understand, he's played something like 200 professional games over the course of the last 4 years. People I know and respect who are much more versed in his career to date tell me there is no way he should be eligible. And this is somewhat completely unprecedented. Now, I'm sure there's variables that I'm not aware of. So this is not me reporting this. But if he is ruled eligible, there are going to be ramifications and ripple effects felt throughout college basketball for a long time. And it's going to change the way international prospects are recruited, because it's basically going to say, hey, whether you played professionally or not, we're going to bring you over here. And it makes me think of guys who went to G League Ignite, went to Overtime Elite. Are those guys going to be eligible for college basketball now? Because they probably should be. It's potentially Pandora's box, and I'm very interested to see how it plays out. Anything else you want to add about the Blue Jays, though, before we move on?
I really like these freshmen. Larry Johnson and Jackson McAndrew. I think they're perfect scheme fits for what they want to be. It's hard to be like, okay, let's pencil them in for 25, 27 minutes a night. but these two freshmen are really, really good additions. It would not surprise me at all if both of those guys are rotation staples all year long and just maximize the depth of this group. Again, last year, this team wasn't very deep. I think they're a lot deeper. So maybe we had a little bit more questions about this group compared to the past, but I like the depth. I like the upside that they have. And then the floor. They have one of the highest floors in all of college basketball with Kalkbrenner in the middle of that.
Jackson McAndrew is a perfect fit. I mean, he's a pure shooting stretch four man. Larry Johnson's almost like the changeup for this roster because he's an elite athlete who can fly around the court and just create havoc. And that's going to cover up for some of the lack of athleticism at other potential positions. So I love the fact that they kind of, took a guy who's a little bit different to balance out the roster. So I think that's a fair point. Now you've got St. John's and Rick Pitino up in this tier. I think this is higher than I've seen them in a lot of other preseason polls. Tell me why you've got Rick Pitino with the top 3 team in the Big East right now.
I love this group. I think this team has a chance to be, maybe one of the top 10 defenses in the sport. Davon Smith, Kadari Richmond, RJ Luis, Aaron Scott, like all 4 of those guys are very switchable. They have a ton of size. They have multiple bigs that they can throw at you. Zubi Ejiofor, year 2 transfer breakout candidate there. Vince Iwuchukwu, a transfer out of USC. They have so many tools. And just the amount of raw size that they have defensively and switchability, I think this group can get up into you and force a ton of turnovers. I'm just really bullish on St. John's and Rick Pitino finding itself. This roster feels like more like a Rick Pitino roster than last year's.
Last year they were 108th overall in steal percentage from a defensive standpoint. And that to me is, to your point, like not what we typically associate Rick Pitino teams with. I think the wild card for this team is 2 things. One, they've got to be able to space the floor and shoot the basketball. When you look at the roster and the players they have coming in, there's clear talent, there's clear experience, with the center position being potentially the only exception. Those to me are the Achilles heel. What do they get out of that 5 spot, and do they get enough shooting? Kadari Richmond, I think, like a fully motivated, a fully charged Kadari Richmond has a chance to be the best player in the conference, in my opinion. He's been naturally talented for a long, long time, but I thought he made strides last year at Seton Hall just in terms of bringing it every day. And now if he can get to the point where he brings it every day and makes shots, now that's going to unlock some much higher ceilings for St. John's. Anything else you want to add on Rick Pitino's club there?
The thing that I like too is Davon Smith is awesome in transition. Kadari Richmond is awesome in the half court. Like having that meld and being able to score in multiple areas is huge. And I think Aaron Scott has a chance to be the best stretch 4 from the portal, maybe outside of that Coleman Hawkins range. Like he is phenomenal. His tape defensively was great. Shot it really, really well. And keep an eye on Simeon Wilcher. Keeping him out of the transfer portal was huge. He's a sophomore that could really, really help this group again as another perimeter shot maker. But again, this group will go as far as Davon Smith and Kadari Richmond take and this might end up being the best backcourt in the Big East and maybe one of the best in the country.
I was thrilled to see Simeon Wilcher come back because I know his recruitment, he was committed to Carolina, opened it up, ended up at St. John's, didn't play a lot last year. But I think being able to double down and trust the system, trust Coach Pitino, trust the proven player development program there, I think that's going to pay off for him, to your point. All right, what are we on? The 4th team you have? Now, this is a group in Xavier that I think some have higher than number 4. Take a look at your projected starting lineup there. Tell me what stands out to you.
I mean, shooting. Dante Maddox, Ryan Conwell, 2 of the best shooters out of the portal. Zach Fremantle, getting him back and healthy is huge. Dalen Swain is a big breakout candidate. I love what he could be defensively this year. Davion McKnight, just super solid. And Sean Miller, I think, is one of the best roster builders and one of the best X's and O's coaches in college basketball. Like, yes, this group is 4th in the Big East right now, but I think this might be a top 15 team nationally, maybe top 20. Like, I'm big and bullish on Xavier being excellent this year, and they have a ton of depth that they can get to, and they can play multiple ways. They can play big, they can play small. Like that stuff is super, super valuable. And like I said earlier, Ryan Conwell, get to know his name, the transfer out of Indiana State. I think he is an absolute pro. His shot chart last year is a complete delight. It was all threes. It's all shots at the rim in the paint. Like I went through and counted. I think you have like 3, maybe 4 shots you could consider as mid-range 2s. Like he is an analytics darling, and that'll play really, really well for Xavier.
Yeah, Josh Ertz, he can draw up a playbook, that's for sure. Now, let me ask you this. I'm going to push back, if you don't mind, on your projected starting lineup. You did say this is a team that can play different ways. But if they start that 5, that is a really, really small team. It's projecting Zach Fremantle, who missed all of last season, to come back healthy. But that's a team that's not only small, but has like zero presence in the paint, because Fremantle, although when he's healthy, he's a gifted offensive player. I think, to be honest, he's someone that opposing teams will target on the defensive end of the floor. And I think we've got to at least account for the possibility that John Hugley could be in the starting lineup as the 5-man and give them that true interior anchor they can throw the ball to and give them some physicality in the post.
And Traore is another transfer that they got as well, too. So like I said, they can play in a lot of different ways. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Fremantle plays a ton at the 4 this year as well. If Jerome Hunter gets healthy, maybe he's the starting 4. But yeah, I feel like this group is going to tend to lean toward offense. And if that offensive efficiency rating is nuts with Fremantle at the 5, I might just ride it and see if I could just outscore teams, because that group could be a real pain to guard.
So to your point, last year, Xavier 69th overall in adjusted offensive efficiency per KenPom. Sean Miller's first year back at Xavier, they were top 10 in the country at 8th overall. The defense has been pretty much similar. Actually, they were even a little bit better last year, went from 64 to 45. But it'll be interesting to see if the lineup construction favors an offensive-oriented approach, as you say. All right, the 5th team you have, and the 4th one in this second tier is Marquette. And admittedly, this is a group that I am a little bit higher on than you are. But I think most people agree, like, this is the spot. Now, granted, they lost a lot. Oso Ighodaro is gone. Tyler Kolek is gone. But I am a big believer in Cam Jones. Like Kadari Richmond, like Alex Karaban, like Ryan Kalkbrenner. Those guys are the top players in this league, in my opinion. And I think Cam Jones is in for a special season. We saw flashes of it when Kolek went out of the lineup last year. He got to slide over and play with the ball in his hands. And I think this could be a huge year for him. Tell me, what is it about Marquette that you like? And what is it that you maybe have some reservations about?
Well, what I like is just the retention, right? They brought back the most minutes of any team in the Big East. They didn't get a transfer. So you have a lot of familiar faces. Chase Ross is going to be way better as a junior. Stevie Mitchell, you kind of know what you're going to get from him, but I think there's another level he can get to. David Joplin, same thing. Like, we know what we've seen from him as a stretch 4, but I think there's a different level. And then one of my favorite breakout candidates all year has been Ben Gold. It's not going to change heading into now. I just love the ability to stretch the floor. And then his handle is super underrated too. So that pick and pop game with Cam Jones and Ben Gold, I think, is going to be really good. My question for them is, how good are they defensively? Their defense took a big drop off without Oso Ighodaro on the floor last year. When you have Ben Gold at the 5 and David Joplin at the 4, I wouldn't say that's super scary defensively. So we know this group can really pressure the basketball defensively, but I still have some questions on that back end. Are they going to be able to have any rim protection? I think team shot over 62% at the rim against Marquette when Oso Ighodaro was not on the floor last year. So that's a big area of concern for me, and maybe the reason why their ceiling isn't quite as high as some of the other teams in the Big East.
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Like, you play with a stretch 5, you can space the floor, and that's going to open the lane up for your guards. I think Chase Ross is another one who I think could be on the verge of a breakout season with that line open, with the lane open, excuse me. But the flip side of that coin, to your point, is where's your rim protection on the defensive end of the floor? So that is going to be a fascinating kind of push-pull to watch throughout the course of the season at Marquette. All right, tier 3 is what you are calling your bubble teams. And you've got 3 teams in this group: Providence, Villanova, and Butler. Let's start with the Friars. Kim English back for year 2, but going to have to do it without Devin Carter. This is your projected starting lineup. Tell me what we like about this group.
A really old group. A healthy Bryce Hopkins is a fantastic Bryce Hopkins, right? Like, he's kind of under the radar here as a potentially a Big East Player of the Year candidate if he can get healthy. Wesley Cardette, Jabri Abdur-Rahim, like, I think there's similar questions. I don't have a ton of concern about them transferring up into this ranks and being impactful pieces. But for me, it really kind of comes down to Jaden Pierre. Like, what version of him do you get? And I thought it was a big deal that Kim English was able to keep him in the fold after he took the job. You have to have an elite level from him as a junior point guard this year. And maybe Bensley Joseph helps out with that, but I think he can elevate into a new tier. And keep an eye on Christ Esendoko, the transfer out of St. Joe's. He's 7 feet. He's 285 pounds. He can really move, though. His tape last year was super inconsistent, but I've talked to some staffers at Providence. Like, his good days have been dominant in preseason workouts. He's got a chance to be an excellent player for them, but I think the roller coaster is going to be up and down for this group. So I trust Kim English. I think he's a really smart, sharp head coach. Defensively, we've seen a lot from them. Offensively, their process has been very, very good. They led the Big East last year in three and rim rate, so they take the right shots. But this group still has some questions if they can really coalesce into a team that's not on the bubble and maybe a top 25 team. And it starts with Hopkins, but I'm really looking at Essendoko and Pierre as the big X factors for them.
So they took the right shots last year. The problem is that they were not a very good 3-point shooting team, just 32.5%. I think that's a variable to watch again this year. What I will say is, to watch a Kim English coached squad is to watch a team that really competes on the defensive end of the floor. They were 18th overall in defense last year in all of Division I basketball. I think this is going to be a terrific defensive team. I think Bensley Joseph is going to fit that DNA. And I think Bryce Hopkins, the return of him, if he can step into a focal and be a focal point offensively, I don't see any reason why this won't be one of the best defensive teams, not just in the Big East, but potentially in the country, as Kim English has just made it a priority. They are really something to behold when you watch them compete on that end of the floor.
No, to your point, like, watching them, like, it feels like every shot that the opponent takes is the shot that Providence wants them to take. And they're all like these tough, contested twos with a hand in your face. Like, they're draped all over you. So that's the part of this. It's like, if you're buying Kim English as one of the rising best coaches in college basketball, as like these young rising coach, you could talk yourself into this group potentially being a top 25 unit. It just kind of comes down to where you're feeling at on some of these, some of these role players, and if they can really maximize or maybe, out hit their coverage a little bit.
All right. Well, speaking of the importance of role players, you've got Villanova next on your list. Let's talk about Kyle Neptune's squad. There's a lot of talk about this team going into the season and what an important year it is there. What do you make of this group, Isaac?
Well, I love Eric Dixon, and I love the idea of Wooga Poplar, but I have a lot of questions about the rest of this group. I think we're going to see a situation where, Villanova has to play well this year. This is an enormous year for Kyle Neptune. And for this group to really come together, I think you have to see a different version of Wooga Poplar than we've seen in the past. He has got to be more than just a role player. He has to take over as one of the top league guards, and that's why he transferred here. So he's a big key for this. And then Jameer Brickus is an interesting addition that they've added out of LaSalle. I think he'll be rock solid for them. Tyler Perkins, another transfer out of Penn. I liked him a lot. I think he kind of fits the Villanova ethos as a booty ball threat who can knock down threes. So I think he's going to be a good piece for them off the bench. And we'll just see what this defense kind of turns into. They were very, very good defensively last year. They were super switchy. I think they can do some of that with Jordan Longino and Wooga Poplar together. But if they try the two big lineup with Eric Dixon at the 4 and Enoch Boyake at the 5, I think you might be a little bit limited with what you can do from a switchy perspective and switching everything. So it's just an interesting kind of wrinkle for this group. But it feels like a team that has a lot riding on their two best players being awesome. And that's Wooga being a 17 points a game guy, and it's Eric Dixon being, the best stretch big in the Big East like he was last year.
They weren't just pretty good defensively last year. They were elite. They were top 15 in the country. They excelled at not fouling. They excelled at getting on the glass and contesting shots. I think that's part of the story with this Villanova team that people don't talk enough about. Here's my concern. Your best players have to be your tone setters. And that's not just coach speak, especially at a place like Villanova. That's reality. Eric Dixon, I think, is reliable in that. I think Wooga Poplar coming home to Philadelphia is the key to this team. About his talent or his ability to put up numbers, but he's got to play a leadership role here every day, not just the 30 nights a year when the lights go on, but every day in practice. He's got to set the tone. He's got to prove that he is ready to play that leadership role here, because everybody wants to talk about how this is a big season for Kyle Neptune. It's a big season for Wooga Poplar too, because NBA scouts around December of last year, they were really intrigued, the shooting percentage and stuff like that. Then it just went downhill, and it went downhill in a hurry. So this is a chance for him to revitalize his reputation, his stock, and really be a face of the turnaround here at Villanova. If he can do that, it's going to pay off significantly for the team, for Kyle Neptune, and especially for Wooga. Wooga's got as much on the line here as anybody, and they need a big, reliable year out of him.
And his best versions are awesome, right? Like the best version of himself has been really, really good. So that's the frustrating part. It's like the best versions, you can talk yourself into it. And then there's other spots where it's just like, it just isn't helping you play winning basketball. So I'm with you. I kind of co-sign everything you have to say. And I hope that he can put it together because he's super, super fun. And who doesn't like seeing a dude that can put their chin on the rim? Like that stuff is really, really fun. He could have some electric dunks this year for Villanova.
And make threes. And it's a cool name to say on highlights, Wooga, So, all right, Butler. Let's talk Butler. Thad Matta, he's back. They're projected to be a little bit better this year. This is a look at how you size up their starting lineup. Tell me what you like and what concerns you.
I think everybody's kind of looking for wings that are switchable, that can kind of do a lot of different things well. And Butler has two of them. Pierre Brooks is a knockdown shooter, year 2 transfer jump that I talk a lot about. I think he was really good last year. I think he can elevate into a new level. Jamil Telfort, same type of thing. Excellent booty ball threat. Guy who can really fill it up in the middle of the paint. Like if you want to play drop coverage against Butler, like Telfort can absolutely go to work in the middle of the floor. So I like those two wings. Now we have some questions about the backcourt. Finley Bizjack was a guy who was in the portal at one point. Getting him back out, I think, is super important. Colby King had excellent numbers for Tulane, shot over 38% on his threes. He was finishing at the rim inside really, really well at the AAC. Like the American last year was a really good conference. So I have faith that he can translate up, and then we'll kind of see what else they get. Jamie Kaiser had some moments last year for Maryland. Patrick McCaffrey has had some moments throughout his career at Iowa. And that's kind of like those X factors for them. Like, are they a deep team? It kind of depends on if Kaiser is a bounce back candidate, if Landon Moore continues to make strides, if Colby King can translate into the Big East. So I like the wings that they have, but there's a lot of question marks throughout the rest of this roster. It feels to me like Pierre Brooks and Jamil Telfort are going to have to be Ironmen and never come off the floor.
All right, 3 quick observations from me on Butler. Number 1, I think Jamil Telfort is an NBA prospect, especially if the shooting proves to be sustainable. Number 2, I think Jamie Kaiser is a way better player than we saw last year at Maryland, and I would expect a major bounce-back campaign this year for him as a sophomore. And number 3, I'm excited for Patrick McCaffrey and the opportunity to kind of redefine himself and just have a successful grad season there at Butler. All right, we are moving on to Tier 4 in Isaac's Tiers of the Big East, and this is what you call the basement. We are going to go a little more rapid fire through these schools. We will start with Seton Hall. Tell me why you've got Seton Hall in the basement.
Well, when you lose Kamari Richmond to a fellow team in the Big East, that's a huge blow. And then, also being able to lose Dre Davis to Ole Miss. I thought he was awesome last year. So this really stinks for Shaheen Holloway, but he's going to have to build this team up from scratch basically again. And they've done that. They have high upside pieces. Garway Dual is a former top prospect that they've gotten in. Scotty Middleton, another former top prospect that they got in, a transfer out of Ohio State. And those two guys are going to be the real key factors for this group. If they hit and they start playing up to their potential, that's the type of way that you can see Seton Hall get out of Tier 4, move into the bubble conversation. And we know, like Shaheen Holloway, excellent defensive coach. He's constantly getting the most out of his teams. His teams regularly, their preseason rating on KenPom and what they finish on KenPom is a lot higher. So I have a ton of respect for him, and it really comes down to if he can maximize this group. But the front court, a ton of questions. Gus Yalden, we didn't get to see much from him last year, redshirted at Wisconsin. Yassine Toomey, really thin kid out of Evansville, can shoot it a little bit, but is that, he's 6'10", I think. Like, does that play in the Big East where there's some absolute dogs? Like, there's going to be some question marks there in that front court. But if Middleton is really good and Garway Dual is really good and Chauncey Jenkins can potentially give them something out of the portal as well, then you can see Seton Hall working its way into Tier 3.
All right, I'll say this. I get why you have him here because of the roster, but I think there is sneaky young talent on this roster with Garway Dual, Jacine Felton, Scotty Middleton, Isaiah Coleman. Like those guys are all talented. And this is the thing, man. Shaheen Holloway, he gets his kids to compete, and they usually overachieve. So if they finish 9th, I will admittedly be surprised. All right, moving on. Your second team in the basement. You do not have them last, though. You've got DePaul. Tell me why you've got DePaul making a move up your rankings.
Well, I think in the portal, especially for these new coaches, like you're trying to see like an idea of what they're trying to build. It's super easy to see what this group is doing. Like the shooting on this roster is just so evident. Jacob Meyer, big time shooter. Isaiah Rivera shot 48% on his catch and shoot threes last year. Troy D'Amico shot over 37% from three last year. David Skogman, a transfer out of Davidson, is a stretch the floor big man who can knock down threes. And all of this, is to set up a guy like Layden Blocker, who I think has the highest upside of anybody on this roster. The Arkansas transfer, he had moments where he was in the starting lineup for the Hogs last year, and they were really good. Like the ability to get to the free throw line was evident. His point of attack defense was awesome. I think he's going to be a walking paint touch for DePaul, and that just pairs perfectly with all the shooting that they have. And keep an eye on David Thomas as well, the transfer out of Mercer. Love his tape. Absolutely love his tape. So this group, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle to be competitive in the Big East, but Chris Holtman's the best coach that this program's had in a long, long time. And this roster has taken major, major strides forward.
And they were so bad last year before he took over. Like incremental progress there is just going to be celebrated. And to your point about Layden Blocker, this roster couldn't be better constructed to allow him to flourish because they have tons of shooting and tons of floor spacing. Layden Blocker is an absolutely dynamic athlete. The shooting is kind of the Achilles heel, the missing link, if you will, at least through high school. But given the space on the floor, I think you are going to see some big-time numbers, some big-time plays. I think he's going to be must-see basketball out there in Chicago. All right. Last but not least, Isaac is actively trying to get producer Kenny to kick him off this show because he's got Georgetown finishing in the basement. Kenny, if you just want to turn off the feed right now, I totally understand. But we will let Isaac try and justify himself for having Georgetown last in the Big East. Isaac, the floor is yours.
I do think Georgetown will be better than last year, so I'll just start there. But the question for me is the depth long term. I feel pretty good about 5 or 6 guys on this roster, but 7 through 10, 11, like that's a ton of question marks. So Malik Mack, the transfer out of Harvard, love him. Just his playmaking is just something really, really special. I think offensively, you can talk yourself into Malik Mack and Jaden Epps forming a really dynamic 1-2 punch. But can they guard anybody? That's where Micah Peavy to me is one of the biggest additions of the offseason. I think he's one of the best wing stoppers in the country, and to be able to get him to Georgetown is huge. And then the front court, Thomas Sorber is a freshman who I think he's probably the second most impactful freshman behind Liam McNeely out of UConn. He's going to have to be huge. And Drew Fielder, like what can we get out of him as a sophomore as well? I'm really high on his upside. How ready is he to demand, a 25 to 28 minute type of role right away in year 2 is going to really, really determine it. But the top 5 of this team is pretty solid. The depth is a concern, and the defense is a concern as well when you're starting 2 guards who are both under 6'2" in the Big East.
Georgetown, by my count, has 11 underclassmen on their roster right now. So again, like Butler, I think incremental progress is the goal here. Malik Mack and Jaden Epps, they could be a very potent offensive backcourt, to your point. What I like about this group, though, is if they can retain this roster. Ed Cooley's got enough years on that deal where you bring Malik Mack back, you bring Kayvon Mulready back, you bring Drew Fielder back, you bring Thomas Sorber back. And now you've got a core that can grow and take incremental progress. I think it would have been a mistake to try and find those Band-Aids out of the transfer portal and not have it be sustainable. They may not be as good as soon as some Georgetown fans hoped, but I think they're building the foundation step by step in a way that's going to prove to be sustainable. And anybody who's followed Big East basketball over the years knows that if you doubt Ed Cooley, you usually end up being wrong. And I'm not trying to end up on any like hot take or, whatever on social media. So keep me out of that. But like I said, I think they're going to take a step forward. And I like the fact that they are building from the ground up with the underclassmen. All right, that is it for the Big East. You can find us back here next week, and it is going to be the conference preview season, basically for all of October, and you can find much more coverage, 247sports.com. We've got wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates, and much, much more. Of course, you're watching us on the 24/7 Sports channel. Thanks for watching.